Hello. So today we are going to learn about particle nature of matter. So today's topic is about particle nature of matter. Now we know that all the everything that is there in the existence is made up of particles. So first of all, let us talk about what is a particle. So a particle is a single piece of matter. Or we can also say the smallest piece of matter is a particle from an element or a compound which is too small to be seen even with the most powerful microscope. So what is particle? A particle is a single piece of matter from an element or a compound which is too small to be seen with naked eye. Right. So it is so small that it is very difficult to see them even with those, the powerful microscopes that you have in your school science lab. Now, particles can be atoms, molecules, or ions. So when it comes to particles, we usually talk about the three types of particles, that is solids, liquids, and gases. So we usually represent them in the form of particles, which or the particle model, which is used to, show the arrangement in solids, liquids, and gases. Now, so the particles in each of these models are shown as circles or spheres. However, the particles in ice, liquid water, and steam look the same because they are all water but in different states of matter. So if we talk about the particles in solid, we will see that the particles are having a regular arrangement in the case of a solid. Similarly, if I talk about liquids, so the liquids also have the particles touching each other closely, as you can see in the diagram, but there are some spaces and there is no regular arrangement in the case of liquids. But when it comes to gases, the particles are far away from each other without any regular arrangement, and these particles are well separated from each other with a lot of spaces in between them. So we use the term intermolecular space to define their to define the spaces between the particles. We use the term intermolecular space. So we know that scientists use these models to show things that are too small to see, like atoms or cells. Sometimes they use models of things which are bigger, like the solar system. So if I talk about, and if I ask you, can you think of a scientific model which is life-sized? So you might have seen a model of a human skeleton or the organs within the human body at school, which are life-sized examples of a scientific model. So this particle model is used for representation of atoms which are very small, whereas the life-size model example could be the one that you see at your school, the model of a human skeleton or organs within the human body, which are life-sized. So you can see them properly, you can study their structure, their functions properly. So now let us talk about the characteristics of solids. So there are a lot of materials that are solid, such as examples are bricks, then we can say paper, wood, metal, and ice. So these are some of the examples of solids. Now the particles in solid are very close together. Therefore, they cannot usually be compressed or squashed. So as I had already shown you, the arrangement of particles in solid is very close together. So that is why we cannot compress solids. And we can also say that the forces of attraction between the particles hold them together and keep them in place. And that is why it is not possible to compress them. Yeah. So the solids cannot be compressed or. Now, since the particles of solid are arranged in a regular way, the particles in a solid move only by vibrating about a fixed position. That means when it comes to movement, they do not move and they simply vibrate at their positions, right? Similarly, if I say that the particles in a solid have a fixed shape and means they cannot flow like liquids. So since they have a fixed shape, they cannot flow like liquids. And you should know that the hotter a solid gets, the faster its particles vibrate. So this means that the solids expand when they are heated. Okay, so these are some of the characteristics of a solid that they do not move, and instead they vibrate at their fixed positions. They have a fixed shape. They do not flow like liquids, and they cannot be compressed or squashed. Fine. Okay. So on the basis of this, I hope you know this, that when substances are heated and expand their particles, do not get any bigger. So that means we usually think that when the substances are heated, they expand because their particles become bigger. No, this is not the case. This happens because when heated, the particles begin to vibrate more, which causes them to move slightly further apart, and that is responsible for the expansion that happens when metals are heated, and not the particles getting bigger, right? Okay. Now, let's talk about liquids. So, in liquids, the examples of liquids could be water, oil, fruit juice, right? And many others, right? So there can be many other examples of liquids also. Now, so we should know that the particles in liquid are arranged in a random way, right? Which is opposite to that of, solids, where there is a regular arrangement, and are close together, touching many of their neighbors. So that means the particles are arranged in a random way, but they are still touching their neighbors, right? So there are some gaps. Because of this, there are some gaps, but liquids cannot be usually compressed or squashed. So although there are some gaps in the liquids because of the random arrangement of particles, but still they cannot be usually compressed or squashed, right? Next, in liquids, the particles have enough energy to break free of some of the forces of attraction. So that means they can break free some of the forces of attraction between particles. And so particles in a liquid can move around and can move over each other, allowing liquids to flow and be poured, right? So we know that liquids can be poured and they flow over each other. And this is the property which is responsible for the liquids being, taking up the shape of the container. We should know that like solids have fixed shape, whereas the liquids take up the shape of the container. That means they do not have any fixed shape. And the reason being that the particles can have enough energy to break free some of the forces of attraction between them, and therefore they can move around and also, move over each other, which makes them flowing, right? Now, I have a question. Uh, can, like, you should know that sand can be poured, right? We can pour sand, but it is definitely a solid. So, what do you think? Why is this? So, let us talk about the reason that, sand can be poured, but it is definitely a solid. And the reason is that sand is made up of tiny particles, and even though these can roll over each other, each grain of sand has a fixed shape. So we are talking about the grain being solid, and that is why the whole, thing is solid. Similarly, I can give you an example, like you can pour marbles too, but they are also solids, right? So we can also pour marbles, but we can't call those marbles as liquids. They are also solids. So when we are considering, the sand particles or the marbles, that every one grain that is present in sand is a solid and it has a fixed shape. It's just that together, all of them can be poured, right? So that is the reason, right? Okay. Now, let us move ahead. So we are going to talk about gases now and the characteristics of gases, or we can say the characteristic of gas particles. So now that you've already learned about solids and liquids, you must have got a little bit of idea about gases. So first of all, let us look at some of the examples of gases. So a very well-known and the most common example of the gases include the air that we breathe, right? And also like the helium that is used in balloons, right? So that is, these are all gases. Okay. Now, so the particles, if I talk about the particles, so the particles in a gas are widely spaced. Okay, they have a lot of spacing between them and they are randomly arranged just like water. Okay, meaning they can be easily compressed or squashed. Yeah, so they can be easily compressed and squashed, right? Because of the large space between the particles. Okay, so the particles in a gas have enough energy to overcome the forces of attraction between the particles so are free to move in any direction. So because they have a lot of spacing between the particles and they have this energy, you know, uh, to, move, that is why they can move freely in any direction. Now, they move quickly in straight lines, colliding with each other and the walls of their container. So I don't know if you have heard about the term pressure or not, but the gases are able to exert pressure because the gas particles collide amongst each other and also they collide with the walls of the container. So because of enough energy they can overcome the forces of attraction between the particles and they are free to move in any direction. And they usually keep on colliding because of the lot of energy. They keep on colliding with each other and with the walls of the container, right? Okay, now so my another question is that why do you think is we use helium inside the party balloons? So the question is, why is helium gas used inside party balloons? So you should know here that that we know that when we use helium or if it is a balloon filled with helium gas, it usually rises above, right? And if you don't hold it, it's going to touch the ceiling, right? You must have seen that in a lot of parties happening. So why do we use helium, specifically this particular type of gas? Is because, my dear, helium gas is lighter than the mixture of gases that make up air. So the lighter helium gas is trying to move above the air, making the balloon rise up. And that is why we usually use them in party balloons because it makes it rise above, and helium gas is lighter than air, right? Okay. So now So now that we have learned, about the three particles or the particle nature of solids, liquids, and gases, let us talk about the comparison. Let's compare the characteristics or the properties of solids, liquids, and gases. So, let's look at a solid, a liquid, and a gas. So when I talk about a solid, a liquid, and a gas. When I talk about a solid, the arrangement of particles looks like this. So I'll draw the diagram for solids, which looks like this. The particles are very close to one another, having a fixed arrangement. Coming to liquids, they do not have, any fixed arrangement, and instead the particles are random. So, but there are still some the particles do touch each other. And when it comes to gases, the particles are far away from each other, having a lot of space between them. So we can say that the solids have fixed shape. Liquids, they take up the shape of container. Then talking about the gases, they also take up the shape of container. Then next, we're talking about solids. They have fixed volume. Liquids, again, they also have fixed volume, and gases have no fixed volume. Yeah. Okay. Now, talking about solids, they are not compressible. That means they cannot be compressed or squashed. Then talking about liquids, they are also not compressible, and gases are easily compressible, right? Okay. Next, they have a regular pattern, right? Solids have a regular pattern. Liquids, they have an irregular pattern, and gases have no pattern or random arrangement of particles is there. Then talking about solids, the particles are close together. Then liquids, particles close together, but they have some space, having space between them. Whereas when it comes to gases, the particles are far apart, right? So, and lastly, if I talk about the last point of difference, that would be that here the particles vibrate in the case of a solid. In the case of a liquid, the particles flow or slide. Similarly, in the case of gases, the particles move freely or quickly in random directions. So these are the some of the characteristics of the three states of matter that we've discussed here and their particle nature. And this makes these properties basically makes one very different from the other. And the particle nature or the smallest particle or smallest part of the particular type of matter makes it so unique in its properties, which are carried forward in large numbers.